Hi, and thanks for joining us for another one of Family Marine's videos. My name's Tom from Family Marine, and the video that we're going to do today is titled How to Operate Your New Boat and Break in Your New Motor. So this video is really for those of you who have purchased a new pontoon from Family Marine, but if anybody else wants to watch it, you're certainly welcome to. Now, because there's so many things to cover in this video, yeah, it's going to be a long video. I'll warn you right up front. But my goal in this is to teach the new boat buyer everything that there is to know right up front about how to operate your new boat, break in the engine, etc., because what we find out down the road is the more knowledge I can give you, the less issues you have down the road, and that's better for all of us. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the motor. Now, because this is a brand new engine, it's going to need to be broken in. And if you read through the Yamaha owner's manual, what it says for break-in on this engine is the first hour, no more than 3,000 RPM, and vary the throttle speed. The second hour, no more than 4,000 RPM, and vary the throttle speed. And then the next 8 hours, short bursts of wide open throttle. So what they mean by that is short burst, 30 seconds a minute. But what they don't want you doing is driving all the way across the lake with a brand new engine at wide open throttle for 5 miles. Okay? You don't need to baby the engine, but then on the other hand, you don't want to pound on it either. Give it a nice, well-rounded break-in procedure. Just like you're driving your car around town. Speed it up, slow it down, speed it up, slow it down. Okay? So, that's the break-in on the engine. Fuel. Now, when we deliver a new boat to a customer, the tank is full. Now, the owner's manual says that you can run 87 octane fuel with 10% ethanol. And I'm not going to tell you not to, but here's the thing that we have with 87 and 10% ethanol. Because it's common for a boat to sit for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, there's a possibility of the ethanol separating from the fuel. It's called phase separation. And when that happens, the alcohol settles to the bottom of the tank, and then it's sucked up into the engine, and the engine just does not run. We have pulled the drain plug on the vapor separating tank on many engines and taken a sample of the fuel, and it comes out where it's pure ethanol on the bottom and yellow gas floating on the top. They just don't run. Once phase separation happens, they just will not run. So for that reason, we suggest you use 91 non-oxygenated fuel in these engines, unless, of course, you're replenishing your fuel quite often like you do in your automobile. We never have that issue in automobiles of phase separation because we're constantly putting fresh fuel in. Heat is one of the things that gets the phase separation to happen quicker. Okay? So that's it with fuel. Now, on the engine, right down on the leading edge of the lower unit is a little bitty hole. This little bitty hole goes in up through the lower unit, through this hose, all the way to the back of the speedometer. And what this does is the more water that goes in this hole, because the faster you're going, raises the speedometer needle. Okay? Now, there's two possible issues that we can have with this. Number one, if your speedometer quits working, it's likely that this little bitty hole got plugged. What I do is I take a small paper clip, straighten it out, stick it in the hole, wiggle it around, clean it out, and it goes back to working. Do not take compressed air and blow in this hose. You'll take that needle and go bing, and it'll bust right off. Okay? The other possible issue with a speedometer is the hose coming off the back of the speedometer. So if you're ever out boating and you go, oh, where's this water coming from underneath my helm? The hose came off. I've seen that happen a few times. Simply crawl up underneath there, stick the hose back on the nipple on the back of the speedometer, and you'll go back to working properly. Okay? Now, on the engine, there is a yellow fill cap for oil right on the back of the engine. Anything yellow on these engines is oil. So this is the fill cap and this is the dipstick over here. There's a yellow dipstick. So if you wanted to check your oil, as you'll notice, the knurled area, right in the middle of the knurled area is good. That's where they want the oil. This is explained in the owner's manual, by the way. Okay? Now, this engine is designed to run at 6,000 RPM. So what we do at Family Marine is we put a propeller on that will allow you to run real close to 6,000 RPM at wide open throttle with a light load, low tank of fuel, one person in the boat, wind behind you, going downhill, right? Okay, so my point is the maximum of 6,000 RPM. The rev limiter kicks in at about 6,400, I believe. So if you're driving across a lake and you hear the engine going, roar, 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 you know, shaking really bad, you're probably into the rev limiter. You're either trimmed up too high and you're sucking air with the prop, or the prop is too small and you're over revving. If that ever were the case, let us know and we will switch props for you. By the way, speaking of propellers, Family Marine always uses OEM, original equipment manufacturer propellers. We do not use generic brand propellers. I did another video on propellers and I talked about the pros and cons of OEM props versus generic brand props. Okay, so in the front of the engine we do have a primer bulb with our fuel hose. We're now using a gray fuel hose. The reason we switched to gray is because, as I said earlier, the sunlight will help deteriorate fuel quicker. When we were using black fuel hoses, I mean this might sound penny-ante, but the black fuel hose, the sun beating down on a black fuel hose would deteriorate the fuel inside the fuel hose quicker, and therefore we switched to gray so it doesn't absorb heat as much. So there's a primer bulb on there, there's our fuel tank, our fuel fill. Okay, up on the helm, the first thing that we have is our tachometer. As I mentioned, the max RPM on this engine is 6,000. Now some engines are higher. Some of the Verados are 64, that 400 horse is 7,000. So you have to check your owner's manual to see what the maximum RPM on your particular engine is, but most are 6,000. Okay, over here we have a trim gauge. Now, you notice I said trim gauge, not a tilt gauge. So the difference that this gauge measures is strictly the trim. So trim is only, you know, about 6 inches worth of travel. It is not a tilt gauge. So as you're tilting your motor up, this gauge is going to measure, you know, that much travel of the engine. When it gets to the point where it goes from the trim to the tilt mode, this gauge does not measure that, just trim. Here's our depth finder. There's a power button right there. Now, this power for the depth finder is wired direct. It is not hooked to any of the switches down below. So this is what I call a battery killer. I cannot tell you how many times I shut everything off on the boat and I forgot to shut the depth finder off, and I come back 2-3 days later and the battery's dead. So not only do you have to shut all your switches off, you have to shut the power off to your depth finder. That's simply pushing the power button. Here's our speedometer. I talked about that when we talked about the little hole in the lower unit that tells this speedometer where to read. Now, it's really common for a speedometer to be plus or minus 25%. Speedometers in boats are notorious for not being real accurate, particularly at the bottom speed. So yeah, you can be 25% plus or minus and still be accurate on here. Same thing with the fuel gauges. Just like your automobile, you know, some automobiles run out of gas with 1/8 of a tank, and some automobiles you can run forever on 1/8 of a tank. Every boat is a little bit different, and unfortunately we never know. So you have to kind of get used to that particular speedometer. Our stereo is hooked to a switch, which is right there. in order to turn our stereo on. So you actually have two power buttons, one up here for the stereo and one down here for the stereo. Okay? Then we, of course, we have our navigation lights and our anchor light. Difference between nav lights and anchor light. Nav lights are your red and green up front and your white in the back. And anchor light is just your white light in the back. So what that means is when you have your navigation lights on and other people see your red or green and your white, they know you're moving. When all they see is your anchor light or just your rear white light, they know you're not moving. That's why they have a 3-position switch here. Our stereo, accessory 1. If we had another accessory hooked to this boat, we usually hook it to accessory 1. We have our docking lights or our headlights up front. We have our interior lights or courtesy lights. This particular boat has a courtesy light here, and this one has LED lighted speakers. So we have blue lights throughout the boat in this particular boat. Again, off being in the middle. And then if this boat had underwater lights, which would be on the back of the tube, that's what this switch would be for. And then over on this side, we have our skirt lighting. If this boat had the lights above the tubes on the outside, that's what that switch is for. And of course, our horn button. Now, here's the problem with these switches. Many of these are 3-position switches, off being in the middle. Okay? A couple of them are 2-position switches. There is a little red light in each switch telling you that it's on, but the problem is, in the sunlight, it's really hard to see that red light. So you have to know your switches and go through each and every one of them and make sure that your switch is in the off position when you're done using the boat. So again, you don't come back 2 or 3 days later and find out that your battery's dead. All right? Now, Corey, let's switch positions because I want to show you the key switch. Oh, by the way, obviously we have a tilt wheel, 5-position tilt wheel. There's a little button down here, you push it, and you can move the wheel into different locations. Down here is our key switch. Now, each key has a number, and what we do at Family Marine is we write your key number down on your sales invoice so that down the road, if you ever needed a key because you lost both of them, just give us a call. We'll look it up in your file, find out what key number it is that you have, and get you the right key. This obviously is your tether. Now, I'll tell you a little story about this. I had a customer call me up and he said, Tom, my engine won't start. So I drove out there and I found that this was hanging down here. And he said, oh, by the way, when I crank it over, the horn comes on. Now, what Yamaha does is if this tether is disconnected and you go to crank it over, hear the horn? That's your sign that says that this tether has come disconnected. Tried to crank the motor over, it wouldn't start, the horn came on, take my tether, I clip it back on there, horn goes off, and now we're ready to start the engine. Obviously, we're not going to start the engine here because we don't have water hooked up to it. You cannot run your outboard motor out of water. I should have shown you the little vents back on the lower unit that have to be in the water in order to operate that motor. There's black little vents on each side of the lower unit that give you, that's where the water intake is to cool the engine. Okay, so that's our key switch down there with our tether. Obviously, we have our shift and throttle handle, push it forward to go into forward gear, and the farther you push it down, the faster you go. Here's a minor issue that pops up every once in a while. Let's say you're driving along and you're wide open throttle, and you take your hand off the throttle handle and it springs back. That's a sign that the throttle friction in here is too loose. In the back of the control box, there's 2 screws. One is Phillips, one is straight slot. The straight slot screw is the throttle friction. So what you do is you stick a screwdriver in there and you tighten up that throttle friction until you get it to the point that you want it to be at, where you can drive across the lake and let go of the handle and it stays where it's supposed to be. So that's how you tighten a throttle friction. all right? There is a little button on here for what we call throttle only, and that's this button right here. Let's say you wanted to rev up your engine like you're in park or neutral in your car. You can do that by pushing this button in, moving the handle forward. Now you can sit and rev the engine up like you're in park or neutral. As soon as you bring it back to neutral, the button pops out. Now you're ready to go into gear. Okay, let's talk about care and maintenance of the vinyl on the seats. In the owner's manual, there's a little card in there that says do's and don'ts of vinyl. Okay, it says do use blah, 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 and don't use blah, 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 blah. And then there's a little diagram in there that says how to remove ink, mustard, whatever the stain may be. So use, they suggest their own cleaner, of course. This is a Durasoft material in this boat. It's extremely ultraviolet light protectant. However, there are some people like myself that still like to go one step further and treat my vinyl so that the ultraviolet light from the sun doesn't fade it. We have that here. It's called Vantage Protection System, and it's a treatment that we put on the vinyl. It helps make it much, much easier to clean, and it reflects the ultraviolet light from the sun. The hardest thing on vinyl is the UV light. It dries out the vinyl, and then the vinyl isn't soft and supple anymore, and the seams tend to tear apart. The vinyl tends to crack. You've probably seen it on older pontoons. We don't have that much of a problem anymore, but because of the quality of vinyl. But like I said, I like to go one step further, and I treat it with the Vantage Protection System. So what they're suggesting for cleaning on the vinyl is a soft scrub brush, a rag, a spray cleaner. They'll tell you what spray cleaner to use in the little card in there. You spray it on, you scrub it in, you wipe it off with a rag. Or you could use some soft, clean water. So care and maintenance of the vinyl is pretty easy. Flooring. All the boats that we sell today have seagrass flooring. Seagrass is made of a PVC product, where this is made of a vinyl product. The seats are. PVC is not as porous as what vinyl is. PVC will not absorb any product that you put on it to protect it. And what happens is it'll become slippery. So let's say you're spraying this material, whatever you want to spray on your seats to keep it from fading, and you get some on the floor, you get overspray on the floor, it's going to become slippery. What I do is spray it on a rag and then wipe it on. Do not treat the floor with any type of UV protectant. It'll become slippery. It will not absorb it because it's, again, PVC, not vinyl. Oh, since I'm here, I want to talk about one thing. Trailering your pontoon down the highway, here's a little trick that we found. Everybody knows that there's a little knob. Can you see me? There's a little knob back here that you can lift your stern light up and down, right? Now, here's what we found. If you trailer down the highway with your stern light sticking straight out the back, as you're going down the highway, this light is bouncing, and what happens is the knob vibrates loose and falls off, all right? And then you lose the knob because it fell off on the highway. Then you got to get a new one, and they don't come just a knob. You got to buy a whole darn bracket, which is dumb. But my point is either trailer it down the highway with it all the way down like this, or all the way up like this. That way it's not bouncing all over the place and you don't lose your knob. You got to make sure that that knob is tight back there. Alrighty? And same thing with what we call trailering brackets. You see these short arms right here? Those are called trailering brackets. So the bimini top is down a little bit lower than what the long arms are when you're using your boat, getting the bimini down lower for trailering purposes. If you're trailering without your cover on, I highly suggest that you take your table out and throw it in the back of your vehicle. I have seen tables blow out when you're going down the highway without your cover. Now, speaking of that, these are called mooring covers, not travel covers. The difference between a mooring cover and a travel cover is a mooring cover is not made to go down the highway, where travel cover is. Most pontoon companies that I'm aware of will not warranty your mooring cover, or playpen cover as some call it, going down the highway. However, we see people doing it, don't we? I see it all the time. Heck, I do it myself. Here's the thing. I'm not taking my brand new, beautiful, gorgeous Premier pontoon and going down the highway on a cold, icky, wet, rainy day and getting the interior of the boat sopping, sopping wet, and then having to clean the whole darn thing when I get to my destination. I'm going to risk it. But I just want to let you know it is not covered under warranty. So what I do is when I put my playpen cover on, we all know that they got tent poles that hold the center of it up to act like a tent so the rainwater rolls off. I put my tent pole up at kind of an angle, I tighten the latch, and then I take that tent pole and I go like that, just to get it that much tighter, even as tight as I can. What happens when we're going down the highway, the hardest thing on covers is they sit and do this. That's really hard on a cover. If I get that cover as tight as I possibly can, I'm less likely to have damage from going down the highway. Okay, here we have another pontoon. This one is on a trailer, so I want to talk about trailering for a little bit, on and off the trailer. First thing, when you buy a boat, motor, and trailer from Family Marine, we supply you with a set of transom tie-down straps. These obviously hold the back of the boat to the trailer as you're going down the highway. Now, here's one thing I found out. If you do not take these off, you cannot get the boat off the trailer. Trust me, I've been there, I've done that, okay? Yeah, you gotta take these things off. Okay, for trailering the motor, a lot of people say, well, what's the proper position to trailer the motor down the highway? You know, when the motor's in the up position, you have half your weight inside the transom and half your weight outside the transom, so all the weight is bearing straight down on the motor, or excuse me, on the transom. Where if you're trailering with the motor tilted all the way down, you have your weight hanging out the back of the transom. You know, either way works well. For long distances, if I were trailering long distances, yeah, I would tilt my motor up. There's a motor lock in here. I would tilt my motor all the way up. I'd put that motor lock in place and I'd drop the motor down on that motor lock. That way my weight is bearing straight down on the transom. For short distances, I don't think that that's necessary. Often I trailer my motor straight up and down. It's not going to affect anything. These transoms are built so well these days, and they're bolted to the chassis so well these days, we really don't have an issue. Now, one of the things with our Tebben trailers that you'll notice, I don't know if you can get a shot in there, Corey, is we have what we call horizontal load guides. Some trailers have post style. You have 4 posts sticking up. Load guides. We have horizontal load guides. I like the horizontals because they do a much better job, in my opinion. When we adjust the load guides, you'll see that they're very close to the inside of the outer tubes. It's nearly impossible. I cannot get this boat on this trailer crooked. Every time I put it on, it goes on straight because the load guides are centering the boat on the trailer. That's what they're for. All right, moving up here. Oh, by the way, one of the things that Family Marine does with all of our Tebben trailers is we upgrade the wheels to the aluminum mag wheels. Don't they look nice? Rather than those painted rims. Those short fat, you've all seen them, those short fat painted rims on these pontoon trailers. We have, those are 10-inch by the way. These are 12-inch aluminum mag wheels. These are radial tires instead of bias ply tires. The radial tires run a lot cooler and therefore they last a lot longer. You'll notice our bunks supporting our boat. All right. Up in the front, we have the great big boarding ladder so you can walk right up to the front deck on your boat. And we have our winch. Now, all winches ratchet up, ratchet down. So what I mean by that is there's a lever here. You take a little pressure off that lever and you can flip it from ratchet up to ratchet down. Right now, we're in ratchet down. Here, we're in ratchet up. Okay? And then some boats have the hook in the front, some boats have the hook way underneath. When the hook is way underneath the bow of the boat, we run this strap down through this hole and up to the bow eye of the boat. This one happens to have a safety chain on it. Here's a owner's manual inside the little storage tube here. Okay. Now, as I said with the transom tie-down straps, you cannot get your boat off the trailer unless you disconnect the strap. All right. By the way, we're back on this Premier, and I just wanted to show you something that I think is really cool. This customer had us put on an option. It's called Vantage Film with a Vantage Pontoon Guard. Now, this color happens to be the black carbon graphite appearing vinyl. So what we do is this stuff comes to us in a roll, and we roll it out, we put it on the pontoon, and then the pontoon guard that is self-adhesive, we attach that to the pontoon. Now, the reason that we do that is, of course, aluminum pontoons like this one over here, when they're brand new, yeah, they look really great. But a week or two in the water, and the acidity in the water is going to oxidize the aluminum. Oxidation is those black, ugly stains that you see going down the side of the pontoon. In a very short period of time, that happens. I've had boats in the water for an hour or two and pulled them out and started to see staining down the aluminum. Aluminum is porous, okay? And it oxidizes. That's what those black stains are. So the Vantage Film, we don't have that issue because we're covering it. Down here we will, but nobody looks down there. This, as you can tell, matches the black pontoon really, really nice. So that's an option that we have. Okay, so that's about it on our little video on how to operate your new boat, how to break in your motor. Now, I'm hoping that all of you that are buying a new pontoon from us, that you watch this video before you come and get your new pontoon, because I'm going to go through this whole thing with you again when you get here. But again, my whole purpose behind this is to get everyone to understand how to operate a boat properly, and that way you'll have less problems down the road, we'll have less problems down the road. Hopefully we've answered some questions that you might have. So now when you do come to pick up your new pontoon, it'll be much easier and you'll understand things a lot better and get it into your head that this is how it's all done. So thank you very much for watching. And by the way, we have plenty of other videos on our YouTube page, how to select the right pontoon, how to select the right motor, how to select the right propeller, so on and so on and so on. So if you're interested, go to our YouTube page, and there's, golly, right now I think we have 75 videos on there on all kinds of different things. So again, thanks very much for watching. Thanks so much for watching. If you're considering buying a fishing boat or a pontoon, here's some easy ways to reach Family Marine. Call us to set up a private showing of any of the 50+ boats currently in stock. Attend one of our boat shows on the second Saturday of every month. Of course, the best way is to simply stop in our store. Family Marine is located 3 miles north of Willmar on Highway 71. Willmar, of course, is located 70 miles west of Minneapolis on Highway 12. Visit our website at familymarineboats.com for more boat previews, and check out our Buyers Resource Center packed with educational videos for boat buyers. You can see Family Marine on Facebook, YouTube, or simply email or call us with any questions you may have. If you've enjoyed these videos, please like and comment below. Thanks again for watching.